Margaret Guire.
Margaret had just married the love of her life and boarded the RMS Lusitania in 1915, excited for the future that lay ahead. The ship glided calmly across the Atlantic, and everything felt ordinary until it wasn't. Without warning, a thunderous explosion ripped through the hull. A German submarine had fired a torpedo, and chaos instantly swallowed the deck. Her husband Herbert rushed her toward a lifeboat, placing her inside with shaking hands. But as Margaret looked up, she saw the towering smokestacks above her, swaying violently. Panic surged through her body. Fearing the stacks would collapse onto the lifeboat, she climbed back onto the deck. Herbert, believing she was safe, boarded another boat. Moments later, the Lusitania tilted sharply. Margaret jumped into the freezing ocean, trying to swim away, but a violent whirlpool formed as the ship sank. She was dragged into one of the smokestacks, along with two other passengers. Just when it seemed certain she would drown, a sudden underwater blast hurled her back to the surface. She was pulled into a lifeboat, coughing and shivering. Across the water, she saw Herbert crying, convinced she had died.
Daniel Reyes.
Daniel Reyes was an experienced cave explorer who thrived in the darkness most people feared. Deep beneath the mountains of Mexico, he entered an unmapped cave system, confident in his skills. Hours later, the ground trembled. A sudden rockfall sealed his only exit, plunging him into total darkness. His headlamp flickered before dying completely. Alone, trapped, and buried hundreds of feet underground, Daniel had nothing but his instincts. He tied a rope around his waist and began crawling through razor-sharp tunnels, inch by inch, terrified of falling into unseen pits. For over 12 hours he crawled, dehydrated, bleeding, and losing strength. When rescue teams finally reached him, they expected to find a body. Instead, Daniel emerged shaken, but alive. Doctors later said his survival came down to discipline, calm thinking, and an unbreakable will to keep moving forward.
Alex Johnson.
Alex Johnson had climbed dozens of peaks, but Devil's Peak in Colorado would test him like no other. The morning began calm, but as he neared the summit, a sudden blizzard rolled in. Wind howled across the ridge, turning the mountain into a wall of ice. One wrong step sent Alex tumbling nearly 200 feet down jagged rock. He slammed into ledges before finally crashing into a narrow crevice that pinned him in place. His leg was broken, his ribs cracked, and the cold seeped into his bones. Trapped overnight in sub-zero temperatures, Alex noticed a tiny stream of melting snow dripping into the crevice. That water kept him alive. When rescuers found him the next morning, they were stunned he had survived both the fall and the freezing night. Doctors later said the crevice had acted like a natural shield, protecting his vital organs from impact.
Sarah Kim. Sarah Kim had explored underwater caves across Southeast Asia, but one dive in Thailand nearly became her last. While swimming through a narrow tunnel, her tank scraped the ceiling and she became wedged in place. She tried to pull herself free. Nothing worked. Her oxygen gauge dropped steadily as panic crept in. Every second felt heavier than the last. Then, without warning, a sudden underwater current pushed her body at just the right angle. Sarah slipped free and kicked upward with everything she had left. She broke the surface moments before her air supply ran out. Divers later said if the current had shifted even slightly differently, she would have drowned in complete darkness.
Rick Allen.
Rick Allen was working on a construction site in Australia when a loud snap echoed across the yard. A steel cable had failed, sending a massive beam swinging through the air like a wrecking ball. Rick barely had time to react. He dove forward as the beam smashed into the ground exactly where he had been standing seconds earlier. Dust filled the air as coworkers rushed over, expecting the worst. Doctors later explained that the beam had missed Rick's spine and chest by mere centimeters. What should have been a fatal accident became a story of instinct saving a life in the blink of an eye.
Yara Gonzalez.
Yara Gonzalez was hiking through the Amazon rainforest when the ground beneath her gave way. She slipped into a fast-moving river and was instantly pulled under by the current. Branches and rocks slammed into her body as the water dragged her downstream.
Several times, she was forced beneath the surface, her lungs burning as panic threatened to take over. Just when her strength was gone, the river flung her onto a shallow sandbar. Local villagers spotted her barely moving and rushed her to safety. Covered in bruises and cuts, Yera survived one of nature's most unforgiving forces through pure chance and unshakable calm.
Leonard Hayes.
Leonard Hayes was flying a small cargo plane across Alaska when both engines failed mid-flight. With nothing but frozen wilderness below, he had seconds to decide his fate. He aimed for a frozen river and braced for impact. The plane slammed into the ice, tearing apart on contact. When everything stopped moving, Leonard was still conscious. Rescue teams later found him with only a broken arm and minor cuts. Experts said the ice absorbed most of the crash force, turning what should have been a fatal impact into a miracle landing.
Nina Patel.
9-year-old Nina was walking home from school when a motorbike skidded out of control and slid straight toward her. Frozen in fear, she couldn't move. At the last possible second, the front wheel hit a puddle, wobbling just enough to throw the bike off course. It missed Nina by inches. She fell to the ground with only a scraped knee, while everyone around her stood in shock. A tiny patch of water had saved her life.
Hans Richter. Hans Richter was climbing in the Alps when a wall of snow broke loose above him. The avalanche buried him completely, sealing him inside a frozen tomb. By an impossible stroke of luck, a small air pocket formed around his face. Trapped for 16 hours beneath the snow, Hans tapped a metal pole against the ice, creating faint vibrations. Rescue teams followed the sound and dug him out just in time. He survived with frostbite and exhaustion, but alive against impossible odds.
Sophie and Liam Carter. Sophie and Liam were kayaking off the coast of New Zealand when a rogue wave capsized their boat. Thrown into icy water miles from shore, they clung to each other as the current dragged them farther out. Hours passed. Their bodies grew numb. Just as exhaustion set in, a pod of dolphins appeared, swimming around them and nudging them toward land. Rescuers later confirmed that without the dolphins and the slowing effect of hypothermia, they would never have made it back alive.
Marcos Silva.
Marcos Silva, a Brazilian firefighter, was battling a blaze inside an apartment building when the ceiling collapsed. Concrete slabs pinned him to the floor as smoke filled the air. Unable to move, Marco lay trapped for hours. A small pocket of clean air formed above his face, keeping him conscious. When rescuers finally pulled him from the rubble, the building had already collapsed around him. He survived with burns and smoke inhalation, but he walked out alive from what should have been his final call.
Isabella Romano.
Isabella Romano was hiking a narrow mountain trail in Italy when the ground beneath her gave way. A landslide sent rocks crashing around her, burying her up to her chest. Unable to move, she struggled to breathe as dust filled the air. Miraculously, a small gap formed around her face, allowing just enough oxygen to survive. 2 hours later, rescue workers freed her. She walked away with bruises and shock, but she had escaped a burial that should have been fatal.
Kenta Sacho.
Kenta Sato was fishing off the coast of Japan when a powerful typhoon rolled in without warning. His small boat capsized, tossing him into raging waves. With nothing but a floating crate to hold onto, Kenta drifted across open water for 2 days with no food or fresh water. On the 3rd day, he washed ashore on a remote island, exhausted, sunburned, and barely conscious, but alive after surviving the full force of the storm.
Maya Hernandez.
Maya Hernandez was driving through the Arizona desert when her car overheated and broke down miles from civilization. With no phone signal and temperatures rising above 110 degrees, she faced deadly heat with no shelter. She rationed a single bottle of water, hiding in the car's shade during the day and walking only at night. After 2 days in the desert, a passing truck finally spotted her weak signals for help. Doctors later said she was hours away from heat stroke. Her survival came down to patience and refusing to panic.
Oliver Bennett.
Oliver Bennett was on vacation in Iceland when he slipped while hiking near a glacier. He fell into an icy crevasse, disappearing from sight in seconds. Trapped in the freezing darkness, Oliver wedged himself between the ice walls to stay upright. He screamed until his voice failed, then waited in silence. 6 hours later, rescue teams lowered a rope into the crack and pulled him out alive. Hypothermia had slowed his body, keeping him alive in conditions that kill within minutes.
Amina Hassan.
Amina Hassan was traveling through Kenya when her bus collided with a truck on a remote highway. The impact flipped the vehicle onto its side, trapping passengers inside. Fuel leaked across the road as fire spread toward the wreck. Amina crawled through broken glass, dragging herself and another injured passenger away seconds before the bus exploded. She survived with burns and deep cuts, but she walked away from a crash that no one thought anyone would escape.